Welcome everyone to a session, Land Restoration in Africa Delivers for People and Climate. My name is Laura. I work with Regreening Africa program as a consultant, and I will be a moderator for today. So over the next 1 hour, we're going to watch some short videos. We're going to hear from Regreening Africa on the key ingredients for successful land restoration. We'll dive into the data, then have a panel discussion to explore the different dimensions of restoration. So hang in there and enjoy. So before we go and start, we'd like to hear from you, and we're going to be launching a poll right now in the chat. And we want to hear from you. And the question that's going to be asked is, how important do you think landscape restoration is for climate adaptation? So you'll see the poll in the chat right on the right-hand side of your screen. And to respond, you're going to type in between 1 and 5, with 1 being the most important and 5 being the least important. Okay, so I think we have gotten a few responses. And we now have a few key messages for this session that I'd like to share with you before we move on to the next segment of the session. So, number 1, landscape restoration is critical for climate change adaptation and mitigation in Africa. Landscape restoration is possible with strong partnerships and by matching practices and approaches to local needs and conditions, and also through working through local structures and processes. Then bringing science, research, evidence, monitoring to the global and local restoration agenda accelerates impact on the ground. Lastly, value chains with equitable economic benefits and policies that support an enabling environment are also critical incentives for actions. So we're now going to watch some short videos to start us off. And the first video is going to outline Regreening Africa's from voices from the community on the ground.
Regreening Africa aims to change agriculture in Africa using trees to improve yields, restore land health, boost resilience, and combat climate change. Current farming methods provide short-term benefits, but often degrade soil fertility, keeping small-scale farmers in a vicious cycle of declining yields and poverty. This impacts all of us. When land degrades, climate extremes hit harder, and ecosystem collapse soon follows. We are all connected to this land. The situation is urgent. We need sustainable, nature-based approaches that work. By introducing the right trees into their fields, farmers are sustainably raising their yields and boosting their resilience to pest and extreme weather. They have new products to use and sell, such as wood, fodder, fruits, nuts, and other valuable tree products. This is an example of agroecology working with nature rather than against her. By combining science with implementation, Regreening Africa helps farmers deploy the right tree in the right place for the right purpose. Over the past 5 years, Regreening Africa has worked with hundreds of thousands of farmers to scale up these effective practices, improving their livelihoods, increasing their resilience to climate change, and restoring ecosystems. These nature-based solutions are effective, proven, and scalable. We have the data to prove it. Our team of scientists work directly with development partners, governments, and local communities, putting the power of knowledge into the hands of those that can use it. Regreening Africa doesn't only regenerate ecosystems, it regenerates livelihoods.
To have overview of the approach used by Regreening Africa. We're now going to hear from the community members themselves, have a community perspective on how they've been collaborating with the Regreening Africa program.
Ko bi dogo tigɛ ni bɛ caman tigɛ I ka to a se ka mɔ fiɲɛ fɛ ɔ sisan I bɛ taa dɔɔnin tigɛ dɔrɔn ni dɔɔnin tigɛ I bɛ na o bila b'o kɛ ka tobili kɛ I tɛ tɔɔrɔ hali kɛnɛyala fanfɛla la a bɛ mɔgɔ a bɛ pisaya dɔɔnin sisan sisiba min tun bɛ bana bila n na o bɛ nɔgɔya la dɔɔnin guakuruko in na.
I know that any calcoi. I go in Arperno, I see calcium quara. I go to Gir Waitachi, I go get arena pratique for the Sintenica sono, I go ga pratique. I go to Almiali, Mutonge Borway. I go to the Kenuku, the Alberi. Ngeno go say, I will take in a basin over again and can go for Ginali. I didn't say we didn't want to inherit we don't know what like the Bora Hamandi, Gano Gonferengo, and Cocating for that. I may wait Diana. Young guy by neither Mamma.
ሚመር እባላለሁ በ05 ቀበሌ አባለ ቡጎጥ ላይ ነው የምኖረው እኔ የአምስት ቤተሰብ መሪ ነኝ ከአምስቱ ቤተሰብ ውስጥ አንዱ ልጄ ነው ድሮ ላይ ማሽላና ጤፍ እየተጠቀምን ስናመርትበት የነበረው መሬት ጥሩ ምርት አይሰጠንም ነበር አሁን ግን ወርልድ ቪዥን ኢትዮጵያ ሪግሪንግ ፕሮጀክት ገብቶ እዚህ ይሄንን ስልጠና ሰጥቶን ቲማቲም ፓፓያ ማንጎ እንዲሁም ደግሞ ብርቱካን የእንትን ዘር እየሰጠን በፐርሰንት ክፍያ እየተከፈለ የቶች እርዳታ እየሰጡንና ዘርም እየሰጡን ያው የሚታየው ሁላ ወርልድ ቪዥን ኢትዮጵያ ሪግሪንግ ፕሮጀክት እየሰጠን ነው ስለዚህ አሁን ላይ ኢኮኖሚያችንን በደንብ አዲያብረን ጥሩ ኑሮ እየኖርኩ ነው ያለሁት አሁን እኔ ለምሳሌ ማለት ነው ልጄንም ቤተሰቦቼንም
nañu ba tol bi am kayit délibéré ko dal li jël kayit yu wóor jox ñu ci kaw lolu nak ñu ni tamé ñu né jël nañ engagement bo xamné ni dañu gorgorlu pour suñu jëkër yi japp ci karkaral bi tol yépp dañ karkaral ba ci biir kër yi ba ci biir ginaaw ki ni wono gi wax deug yalla mat mi sax nga xamné ni mom lañuy jëlé ci tol bi ngeenel bi mi indil ken xamul fam la yam ndax ci mat yi dañ koy indi diko toggé yi say ñu jaay sax nak jappalé suñu xalé yi nga xamné ñu ci école bi kéré wala bik xama wala bik wala kayé papa am yegul dang koy fajj ci mat momu té lolu karkaral moko fi indi.
Now to introduce Mika Bono-Cheng, who is the program manager of Regreening Africa, to share some key ingredients for successful impact.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I'm really delighted to be with you all online to share these ingredients of success from an effective and impactful large-scale landscape restoration program in Africa. Issue that affects over 3 billion people globally. Now, restoration ranges from working in rangelands to tree-based agricultural systems, but in all of these cases, it can lead to improved soil, greater vegetation cover, and in turn, greater agricultural productivity, tree-based value chains, livelihoods, jobs, biodiversity, and importantly for this COP, climate change mitigation and adaptation. Now we have a vision to move away from these degraded landscapes into restored landscapes. You saw a video just now of Adam Yamer, who's from the Ambasel Wareda in Ethiopia. By moving away from degradation and restoring his land, he's now able to provide income and extra food for his household. And this is a vision we have for the continent. And so Regreening Africa, after 5 years, this program funded by the European Union has been able to work across 8 different countries in sub-Saharan Africa with a very ambitious target of reaching 1 million hectares of land and benefiting 500,000 households. Regreening Africa has really concentrated on incorporating trees into different land use systems, combined with soil and water conservation, value chains, and policy interventions. But because of this 5 years of rich implementation and vast scaling, we are now at a place where we can take lessons and experience to inform future restoration initiatives. And we are so confident because this program has been able to reach out to over 500,000 households and over 850,000 hectares in its 5 years. And while we're in the process of consolidating and understanding how many of those reached households and hectares are taking up the practices and the impact of these interventions, we are very confident that large-scale and impactful restoration is possible. And so based on this experience, we'd like to share some ingredients of success. The first is around matching practices to current and future local contexts. By that, we mean the local conditions, the environmental conditions, the needs of the community, both now and in the future. Regreening Africa has had a strong emphasis on tree growing. We want to move away from large tree planting campaigns where many of the trees don't survive, or the trees that are planted are not diverse or useful. We want to be looking at how trees are cared for, how a diversity of trees can be brought in, and how they can be managed to be the most productive. Regreening Africa has really emphasized farmer-managed natural regeneration and assisted natural regeneration, which takes place in more communal areas. Farmer-managed natural regeneration, for those that are not familiar with it, is when we prune, resprouting shrubs and trees and allow them to grow. In this way, they're more resilient in dry areas and less exposed to water stress. In dry areas, we're much more likely to have indigenous trees regenerate, and the farmers are able to select which regenerating trees are left on the land. It is a low-cost and scalable solution that, when combined with other techniques, has been very effective in restoration. Any discussion about tree growing needs to consider nurseries, quality seedlings, including indigenous and a diversity, including grafting so we have the best quality. A combination with soil and water conservation has been critical in the drier areas, particularly if we want to combine tree growing with this soil and water conservation and increased agricultural productivity. Our second ingredient of success is working through local structures and processes. We have really learned that to scale to large numbers, we really must localize and have respect to local diverse situations. Regreening Africa has worked through lead farmers, community groups, faith-based organizations, and supported effective government local institutions. In this way, we are able to adapt to each of the circumstances, scale and reach to much larger areas, and ensure that those efforts are sustained into the future. Our third ingredient of success is around addressing the drivers of degradation, as well as the incentives of restoration. This is a photo from Ghana, where fire is a huge degradation process. It really inhibits the regeneration of trees on those lands, and a management of fire through bylaws and local conditions has been seen as critical for restoration. Incentives are also incredibly important drivers for restoration and motivate people to both establish and maintain trees. This is an example of the share value chain, which is also an equitable way to bring income into the community. Incentives like this and linked value chains, which we'll hear more about, are an important component of any restoration ambition. When we talk of incentives, we also must take into account ownership, looking at land and tree access, ownership, rights, and use. This is a photo from Senegal, where trees are currently that do regenerate on your land. To be able to heavily cut them or prune them, you need a permit from the government. And while the permit is free, the process and the inhibiting factors around that bureaucratic process makes people think that the trees actually belong to the state and is a disincentive for restoration. By addressing these types of policy dimensions, as took place in Niger, and I hope you'll hear more about in this session, we are able to provide more trust in people to restore their land, that they will benefit from the outcomes. Our fourth ingredient of success is integrating science and evidence to magnify impact. Within Regreening Africa, we've captured information from many different sources. For example, household surveys to estimate reach, uptake, as well as to look at the projected livelihood benefits into the future. Combining this with biophysical information using the land degradation surveillance framework, which Tor will elaborate on, combining on-the-ground data collection with satellite imagery, we're able to have a good understanding of the land health. We can further triangulate with the Greening Africa app, which you can download from the Google Play Store and use in any of your projects. And this allows us to see the polygons, the areas that we're actually restoring, and then match them to changes in biophysical, in the land health conditions, as well as in the livelihoods over time, and understand what is working and where. And we want to bring this evidence into our decision-making. And we use a stakeholder approach to risk-informed and evidence-based decision-making to be able to lead this process. We have annual joint reflective learning missions that bring information from the community, from the NGO partners, as well as from government and scientists, and use that to adapt, reflect, and improve the program, as well as informing policy. And our last ingredient of success that we'd like to share with you is around strengthening partnerships and inclusion. Regreening Africa has a unique partnership model. The consortium is led by a research partner so that we can have a research in development approach. Implementation is led by some of the world's largest NGOs in consortia in the countries. We have national oversight and coordination committees that link us to government and policy directives. And by working across 8 countries, and across multiple partners, it's enabled cross-learning and greater adaptation and advancement. This model has allowed us to be adaptive, has allowed us to scale, and has allowed us to learn, and has been very, very novel and important in the program. We want to also move beyond just gender inclusion to transformation, and this has been one of the focuses of the program, particularly with our work in Ghana. And putting youth at the center, recognizing that they make up the largest proportion of the population on the continent. They are the future, and without including them, we're not taking into account sustainability, as well as those who will actually benefit or not from what we do today. So looking forward, we're in the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. There's over 100 million hectares of lands pledged under the AFR 100 toward the Bond Challenge. With renewed intention and investment in the Great Green Wall, there is a lot of attention on restoration. So we must take these lessons, these ingredients of success, and integrate them to scale out and further improve our restoration efforts. So what I would like to leave you with is that landscape restoration is possible, and it is incredibly critical for climate change adaptation on the continent. By using these ingredients of success, we can help magnify our scaling, our reach, our impact, and equity of these programs. And we need greater investment in restoration for climate change adaptation. And with that, I hand it back to you. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you so much, Mika, for sharing such an insightful presentation and sharing the key ingredients for the success of landscape restoration. So now I'd like to remind everyone, if you have a question, please put it in the chat box, which is at the right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll try and address them as we continue. So I would like to now introduce Tovagin, the head of Spatial Data Science and Applied Learning Hub at C4ICRAF, to share some data-driven thoughts and insights. Welcome, Tor.
Thank you so much, Laura. So I'm going to talk a little bit, building on what Mika presented. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we are linking scientific research or more conventional science to citizen science, and with some examples from Regreening Africa, with the objective to basically transform land restoration initiatives. So as Mika kind of she gave a great highlight around sort of what we're doing in Regreening Africa. Some of the challenges we have beyond Regreening Africa is how to translate technical insights into actionable policy and practice. So that includes having indicators that are relevant, that are robust, and providing timely data and evidence at scale. And of course, Mika mentioned also stakeholder engagement, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But the key here is really that through this, we basically have to change the behavior of scientists as well to provide this kind of information in a timely way. The other challenge, or one of the other challenges, is to scale and sustain interventions. So that it comes to the sort of the community engagement, and you saw that in the videos earlier. The context-specific solutions, or we like to call it options by context, but basically it has to do with solutions or interventions that are specific to the context that we're looking at. And then, of course, having really good monitoring systems that allow us to monitor across multiple scales and multiple contexts, because we know that there are so many different contexts out there, basically. So just a small sketch here showing our approach. So just some highlights here. So I'm not going to go deep into this, but in the top right there, you see the citizen science side of it, and this is where the Regreening Africa app comes in, which Mika showed. So there's a strong community engagement component in that, and we also use the app here to crowdsource information. So that helps us to scale data collection. In the top right, we have the land degradation surveillance framework, and we'll see a little bit more about that in a minute. But basically, the idea with the LDSF is that this is very structured and very consistent to basically collect information on land health indicators. And then it provides a framework for predictive modeling, for mapping, and also has the systematic sampling design. So that's kind of the science side of it. And then on the left there is the citizen science. And these two go hand in hand in our approach. At the bottom right, we have another aspect of our science, which is the monitoring and evaluation work and the household surveys, which are also structured and has a very strong impact assessment and learning component. And then finally, in lower left, Mika also mentioned the stakeholder engagement, or the shared approach. So here it is all about bringing evidence into this and having stakeholders engage with that evidence, and also adaptive learning, root cause analysis, etc. So just to go a little bit into the land degradation surveillance framework. So here, the objective is really to provide timely data and evidence at scale. And there's a lot of different indicators that we capture in the land degradation surveillance framework. I'm not going to go into detail. And I'll show a couple of examples in a minute, but they're around land degradation, of course, soil health, which is very key, and obviously biodiversity, vegetation cover, etc., and also capturing land use or management. So we're building on this network. Here you see a map with each of these green markers on the map represents one LDSF site, or one land degradation surveillance framework site, which is 100 square kilometers. So each of those markers represents a 100 square kilometer landscape. So, and you can see some photos here of various people doing the sampling on the ground. So essentially, we're collecting all these different indicators that I showed in the previous slide across all of these different sites. But the key here is that we're building this from the ground up. So it's a data-driven network that you saw in the previous map, but building from the ground up, from plot by plot, basically. So within each of those 10 by 10 kilometer, 100 square kilometer landscapes, we have 160 plots. Here's the team on the ground. You can see them measuring trees, collecting soil samples, looking at rangeland, grass species, etc. So all of this is built from the ground up into and across landscapes. Each of these dots represents one of those plots that you saw on the previous slide. So it's very systematic, very robust, and it allows us to assess a number of different indicators across landscapes, and also to inform baseline assessments and monitoring. We know that landscapes are complex. We know that there's so much variation. As you can see in the background here, this is just an animation of vegetation cover across parts of Africa, sort of the Great Green Wall belt of Africa and a bit more. And you see how the variations are there, and this is what we're looking to track and to use to inform interventions. We also have to move beyond land cover. So here's a map of showing soil erosion across the Great Green Wall countries. This map represents 2020 to 2021. And we can, in red here, we see the areas where, based on the data and the models we have, we predict in red higher erosion, and then the darker colors represent lower erosion. But the key is really to move beyond land cover. And this also includes soil health. So here's a map showing soil organic carbon concentrations across the same countries. So we can basically look at the variations and the dynamics of these indicators over time. And this is really important because these are the processes that influence the resilience of these landscapes to climate change. Now, Mika also mentioned the Regreening Africa app, and here's a little infographic showing the citizen science part of what we're doing. And it's really about connecting the tree planting, the farmer-managed natural regeneration, or FMNR, and the nursery work to each other and to the land health assessments that we saw in the previous slides. So with the Regreening app, we have this really strong community engagement. We have almost 170,000 farmers registered on this app at the moment across many countries. And with the data coming from the app, we can basically assess what the changes over time within areas that farmers are restoring. So in a way, it brings a lot of the power of this into the hands of farmers. And it's really the combination of this with structured data and the use of remote sensing or earth observation that is key here. So using the systematic field sampling, such as the LDSF, to assess soil and ecosystem health, feeding that information into citizen science, data collected using citizen science, and then back to communities. And then having a really strong co-design element to this, where we basically go from data collections through to the development of tools, of dashboards, including the Regreening app, which was also co-designed with users. And this, in terms of our approach, is really a key element of it. And this is where the shared approach also comes in. Very, very critical, because we do not want to just develop tools that sit on a shelf or put online and then expect people to use them, but we really want to involve stakeholders and users in the design process itself, which is very critical for sustainability. So thank you very much, Laura. I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Tor. It was really great to see how the data is unpacking and how the stakeholders are being involved in that. So it's now my pleasure to moderate a panel which was going to delve more into the ingredients of success. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Laura. Technical team, could you please spotlight all of the panelists while I introduce them? We're going to be joined today by a number of absolutely extraordinary individuals who have achieved things in restoration that are an inspiration. Lee Vinoviecki, who is going to start us off, leads the soil lab at C4ICRAF and has developed what I have no hesitation in saying is the best way of understanding the behavior of soils and monitoring them at scale and cheaply that I know of. Adrian is a land restoration steward from Kenya. He's a youth and he is a person who has managed to enthuse people to deal with these obstreperous creatures called trees. George Bazongo from Tree Aid has understood that money makes the world go round and has developed really innovative ways of getting incentives at play to encourage people to modify their landscapes. Mawa Karambiri, our dear friend from Burkina Faso, is a policy wizard. She understands how to align the landscapes to ensure that the latter are regreened. And Chief Sintaro, who is a traditional leader from Ghana and who has spent many years in Australia, is harnessing the powers of his chiefdom to ensure restoration in the landscape, while Anna from Senegal is taking all of these evidence lines to encourage policymakers, farmers and land managers to restore landscapes by regenerating trees and by managing their cattle more effectively. Finally, Bernard Crabbe from the European Commission has been shepherding Regreening Africa for the last few years and will give us some impression of what can be done from the perspective of donors to scale these approaches up. But first, let's start with you, Lee. Tor said that part of the things that we do is to change the behavior of scientists for this research and development approach to be so effective. But presumably, we also need to change the behavior of NGOs, of citizens, of policymakers and donors to ensure that they understand the value of research. How do we go about integrating, embedding research and development?
Thank you so much, Patrick. I'm so pleased to be with you here today, and I'm calling in direct from Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. And yes, this place is buzzing with energy. And in fact, engaging here has really brought to light the critical importance of bringing together multiple actors, partners, including research and development to accelerate impact on the ground. And regreening has demonstrated how it's truly possible to dissolve these silos, to work together, and in this example, scale landscape restoration. So let me start with the benefits. For example, as Tor demonstrated, bringing together researchers, we bring evidence and evidence-based solutions for scaling context-specific processes. Development partners bring the element of reach and scaling to reach not tens of farmers, but hundreds of thousands of farmers. Researchers also bring robust yet simple monitoring techniques of key indicators of soil, land, and livelihoods to track implementation on the ground. And I think Tor showed this. This really enables impact monitoring as well as prioritization for investment. But to your real question, Patrick, how do we do it? It requires behavioral shifts. So yes, I am a scientist. I am based in Nairobi at C4E-CRAFT. And I realize that we need to shift our behavior. And that means we need to produce meaningful results that are also shared in a timely manner. When decisions are being made on the farm or decisions being made by investors, we must adapt how we work. And by the way, how we communicate. And that's what I find particularly exciting. In closing, another benefit of research and development is how we can now tailor our intervention context. We used to apply a one-size-fits-all in terms of agricultural or restoration and interventions. But now, because our research is big data, big electronic data collection, as Tormika mentioned, we have shifted to a demand-driven, real-time application because we have the tools, we have the methods to both tailor interventions to meet farmers' needs, but also to track these interventions so that we can reach our restoration targets, SDGs, and of course, I'm sitting here at the climate COP, so the Paris Agreement. So with that, I think this is the way of the future. We all are working together and acknowledge this behavioral shift. Hope to see everyone later today at COP27.
Lee, thank you very much. I mean, 3 words that stuck in my mind from your presentation: meaningful data, timely data, and data that is communicated well. Adrian, as the youth representative, as the man who is trying to get people to understand the importance of trees and to restoring these landscapes, you would subscribe to that too, right? What you're doing is meaningful. You depend on timely data in order to understand what to do, and you spend your time communicating. Tell us a little bit about how you do that, how you work with people like Lee and with the farmers and the youth that you engage with.
Thank you very much, Patrick. For me, when I look at Africa and the percentage of youth, Africa has a huge population of youth, and restoration is our future, right? We need food security, we need livelihoods, we depend on these ecosystems for of course all the resources that we get. And
but how do you go about doing
with Lee, of course, I quickly realized. Sorry.
Go on.
Yeah, so I work with. So we work with the local community, the indigenous Rendile and Samburu communities, building upon their local knowledge and kind of using that and bringing in science through help, of course, with ICRAF and some members of the Regreening Africa. And through that, we were able to have more robust restoration outcomes. And this led to the recognition as a restoration steward by the Global Landscapes Forum. So restoration really has to include the young people, because if we don't take this restoration agenda forward as young people, then our futures are compromised, and so more youth need to be inspired to be engaged.
And so what incentives do you use to incentivize young people to participate in this approach?
So it has to be the incentives we use is one, through FMNR, you get basic needs such as firewood, such as fodder for the livestock, because we're pastoralists and we're dependent on the fodder to be able for our livestock to be able to survive. So if we do the restoration, then that is directly linked to our livelihoods, and we will not struggle to move a longer distance so that we can be able to find some of these necessities in conflict areas in with climate change affecting us. So that's kind of the biggest incentive for now, creating a livelihood opportunity based out of restoration.
Thank you, Adrian. Incentives are crucial to make it happen. George, I'm sure you would agree. You developed a pretty innovative way of dealing with value chains to provide incentives for better land care management and for the maintenance of trees. George, tell us how Tree Aid goes about doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I think that for the value chain, we supported what we call the non-timber forest products value chain across all the landscape, because if we want communities to restore the landscapes, to work and to plant and do farming and natural regeneration, they should see the landscape sometimes for short and medium term. So this value chain are to create more money, because if we take like a few minutes ago about share value chain, but we are promoting also baobab, moringa, and others. And when we produce this, the most important for them is, yes, producing these trees, but we are using also this one to process and to market, and it increase the income and also to diversify the source of income and food for these communities. Like it's increased the income sometimes by more than 100%. And if they need to continue to grow these activities, with money, with food for his family, then we need to continue to plant trees, to keep all trees alive. If we want to continue to have a raw input, the raw material to process and to make more money. So it's making them, to continue to protect where they planted, and also to generate more trees and in these landscapes.
So, George, I mean, I have a business background, so obviously getting your raw materials, transforming them, and figuring out how to market them to make a bigger margin is part and parcel of business. So what exactly was the magic sauce here? What was missing in the mindset of the people you work with in order to have them adopt these business-minded approaches?
Yes, what was missing is, first of all, some technology to improve the quality of what we produce. The second thing is also in the quantities and of what we produce, and how we diversify according to the market need. And the second side, it's what we propose to the market, because we used to put in the market some raw products, but now we used to produce and to process the leaves, the nuts, the powders, also in a more design product that we can see in we can propose to this market, and also to diversify. I was talking about all the products, like for here, we used to sell the raw nuts to the market, even the international level. But by putting them, by supporting them to process this, it will help these women to work together and we study, we made in the central south of Burkina Faso. We see that this improve the share marketing and income by more than 25%, which is really huge when we see that more than 22 million people are living under this value chain in Burkina Faso. So this money trying all.
Absolutely, George. And what strikes me there is not only how sensible this approach is, but also the fact that you did not once mention the word policy. So it seems that at least in Burkina Faso, you are not dealing with policy hindrances to have people build these businesses, build these value chains, manage these trees better. But I know that it may be just my own naivete. And Marwa, you are our policy specialist. I'm sure you know the good, the bad, and the ugly about the management of trees across the Sahelian landscapes, across greening Africa. Could you summarize for us how policy becomes from being a hindrance to good management to becoming a supporter of good management? And perhaps if you have some examples.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patrick, for the floor. Indeed, we all agree here that land restoration is about people and the environment. So to ensure that we equity and in labor for land restoration and also in the benefit sharing occurred, we really need to address policy issues. And in the Sahel, there are key reforms that are needed to accelerate land restoration. And here I wanted to focus on one key aspect that is dear to my heart. That is about tree rights and land rights and their security. Around those issues, there have been some polarizing views of those on one spectrum of the that thinks that if you enable farmers to have greater rights on their trees, we are going to cut everything down. And the other view is that you really need to give farmers more rights. So,
Marwa, I'm just going to ask you a question there, because that brings me back to this research and development approach that Lee was talking about. The scientific evidence is pretty obvious. If you give people, farmers, the rights to their trees, they're not going to cut them down, they're going to keep them. So how, I'd like Lee, if you can come back in later to tell us how we can use your approach, the research and development approach, to get this idea into the head of these policymakers. Marwa, back to you.
Yeah, definitely. We know that there are institutional stickiness in the region around those issues of policy reforms. So I think it's really high time to first recognize legal status for the trees on farm and the trees in the agroforestry parklands, and to taking related regulations, for example, decrees and RTA for the governance, the use and the sharing of the benefit modality regarding those true resources. And Niger currently is presenting an interesting example with the presidential decree on the regulation and the management of assisted natural regeneration. So this specific decree in Niger is unlocking greater rights and opportunities to the farmers over the restored ecosystem, while providing legal instruments for land security. So to contribute actually to this policy reform and changes in the region, we've organized a cross-country policy learning visit in Niamey in September 2020, where we brought decision makers from Mali and Senegal to Niamey to learn from the policy influencing process that took place and that led to the presidential decree on the ANR in Niger. So the event resulted really in clear shift in mindsets, as participants for the most part thoughts from the beginning that they don't need any type of reform in their countries. But after the visit, it was clear that they changed mindset and they engaged to advocate for similar reforms in their own countries.
Right, Marwa. So that's really exciting, because for those of you who don't know, Niger became the first country in the whole of the Great Green Wall area to clearly say the tree belongs to the farmer, no ifs, no buts. And that was done through a presidential decree. So Marwa, you're beginning to see movements in that direction in other countries?
We have spots of movements, but that needs really to be in synergy for a much more stronger advocacy. Otherwise, this is really a key issue that is preventing the scaling up of land restoration in the region, the Sahel region.
Marwa, our next speaker, our next panelist is going to be a traditional chief. But you're looking at it as a policy scientist. Tell us a little bit about how you see the optimal interaction between the legalistic approach that states use and the evolved community management systems that are embodied in the chiefs.
I think there is a need actually for the governments in the region to look at what is happening in the ground. It's really easier to take nice reforms on papers that are not fitting and that are not working on the ground. So a bottom-up approach is really critical to putting into synergy these legal requirements from a formal law perspective and the right of the communities from a traditional and from a customary entitlement perspective.
I'm now going to ask exactly the same question from the other perspective to our next speaker, Chief Sintaro. Chief, you are using your traditional position and your experience of having run interesting affairs in Australia to bring large-scale change to your part of northern Ghana. From your perspective, how does that interact with the policies coming from the Ghanaian state? Over to you, Chief.
Thank you. Ghana's agroforestry potential in the Northern Development Zone, where I come from, is mostly untapped. We cover over 40% of the country's total surface area, and yet mostly dry land. Is unimodal, rain pattern with land degradation at its peak and annual ravages of harmattan. So the devastating effect of the environment due to our own consumption pattern requires chiefs to play a pivotal role in the way our natural resources are being managed. Hence, we felt that the regreening project in terms of restoration land Africa project was a catalyst in the collaborative approach to landscape restoration in the various communities of the Myong district, of which I am the chief of Sakwaya in northern region of Ghana. The Ghanaian land tenure system is very pluralistic. It's got overlapping customary and statutory framework. The constitution of the country actually vests land in the state. Customary land is in the clans as well as extended families and customary authorities. So the Ghanaian chieftaincy has evolved into an institution with both modern and traditional dimensions backed by the state and the constitution. And we have been very fortunate enough to be able to apply these in natural regeneration. Because one, chiefs are the custodians of the land within communities, and hence they bear the potential to oversee its utilization by the communities as part of their local area climate change adaptation initiatives. So because they are leaders in natural resource protection and sustainable environmental management, they actually pay much attention to what is actually going on. So it's very imperative.
How does that interact with state power? Because state power is unified across the region, but as you pointed out, you have very many different customary management systems across the same region. In some places, the chief manages the land. In other places, it's private ownership. In other places,
yes, within the same region, generally. Correct. In northern region of Ghana, land is vested in the custodianship of the chiefs. They are actually the custodians of the land. So any activity that involves land management, yes, the state has got the national overarching responsibility, but it is the chiefs who are the custodians of the land. So any projects or any implementation that impacts on the land, it requires the buy-in and the involvement of the chiefs to make it a success. Because over the years, relationships have been built with various partners, including Catholic Relief Services, CSRs, because chiefs, as members of the various committees within the district assemblies, they understand the dynamics that goes on in managing the land and special project. We are able in our community for the first time in the history of the community, somebody spoke about incentives. It is actually owned by the community. We're able to establish nurseries, and for the first time, they actually raised over 20,000 Ghanaian cedis from nursery, just selling seedlings, and at the same time, they are managing it themselves.
That's really encouraging, and I know from my own colleagues and the work that was done in Ghana how important the smooth interplay between the traditional authorities, the chiefs, and the other stakeholders has been, and that's a model that I hope many other countries can learn from. Perhaps, for example, in Senegal, because Anna, you've been taking all of this, you've been managing this approach across Senegal for Regreening Africa for many years now, and you've been taking the science, you've been dealing with the chiefs, with the state authorities, and in particular, you've been dealing with one issue that bedevils a lot of the landscapes across the band of the Sahel, which is the potentially conflictual relationship between pastoralists and farmers. Pastoralists desperately need fodder for their animals in the dry season. Farmers desperately want to protect their trees, and sometimes that can lead to trouble. So how did you deal with that in Senegal? How did you ensure that the trees could keep on growing despite the grazing pressures? How did you ensure that the interests of the pastoralists and of the farmers was respected? Anna?
Yeah, merci Patrick. En fait, pour le cas du Sénégal, vous savez, on a des communautés qui étaient en conflit parce que tout simplement, il y avait la divagation ou la transhumance. Donc, cette communauté, voulant gérer ce défi et n'ayant pas les moyens de le faire, a eu la chance d'avoir le projet de Regreening Africa qui a su assurer une gouvernance locale en impliquant les autorités administratives, les services techniques, les leaders religieux, les personnes ressources. Vous savez, l'agroforesterie, c'est tout un système. Arbres, bétail et culture. L'un ne saurait exclure l'autre, sinon ce serait un système incomplet. On n'aurait pas atteint les résultats. Imaginez le paysan qui empiète sur le parcours, ça énerve l'éleveur aussi qui laisse ses animaux divaguer dans la parcelle du paysan, ça énerve le paysan, d'où les conflits. Ce qu'on a fait, c'est justement appuyer ces communautés à identifier les parcours de bétail, à les délimiter et à les matérialiser. Et tout le monde était OK. Et ce qu'on a constaté, c'est une cohésion sociale, une communauté réceptive pour adopter au mieux les bonnes pratiques de reverdissement, sont particulièrement au Sénégal la régénération naturelle assistée, communément appelée la RNA. Et l'existence ou bien la redynamisation ou bien la présence de ces parcours de bétail est même un facteur de durabilité, de conservation de ces parcelles sous RNA. Parce que tout simplement, il faut préserver les jeunes pousses dans les champs. Donc, voilà un peu ce qu'on a eu à faire de manière très brève au Sénégal.
Merci Anna, et comme l'appli Regreening Africa nous l'a montré, vous avez eu un grand succès à gérer ces conflits, à encourager ces communautés, à trouver des solutions qui leur permettent de régénérer les arbres, et j'aimerais vous féliciter à cet égard. Nous n'avons que très peu de temps qui nous reste, et maintenant, Bernard, vous représentez l'Union européenne qui a financé Regreening Africa et qui, depuis des décennies maintenant, s'investit pour la gestion des ressources naturelles dans les pays de la zone semi-aride africaine et de la Grande Muraille Verte en particulier. Comment est-ce que vous appliquez les leçons que vous apprenez via ce type de projet et comment est-ce que vous essayez de les mettre à l'échelle?
Merci Patrick. Merci Patrick. And let me shift back to English, if I may. Well, first to say that it's great to be surrounded by actors that don't only speak about land restoration, but make it happen, and make it happen through a very comprehensive approach, combining not only technical solution on the ground, but also local governance solution, value chains that provide incentives, and then work at policy level. So that's great, and that's why the EU indeed has been a very proud supporter of this program. 500,000 households, up to 850,000 hectares restored. I think these are substantial achievements. We have demonstrated that land restoration can be achieved at scale and at relatively low cost. So now, while the EU remains extremely committed, as you have mentioned, the Green Deal is our flagship policy, so a very strong green ambition. Africa is the top priority of EU international partnerships. Africa needs Europe as much as Europe needs Africa. This was reaffirmed at the last EU summit between Europe and Africa at the beginning of this year, where it was agreed to raise, try and raise up to 150 billion euros in an investment package using leveraging tools to mobilize private and public investments at scale. This around the number of flagships, and the Great Green Wall is one of these flagships. We thereby recognize the importance of healthy land for resilience, for livelihood, for sustainable development and food security. So the Great Green Wall, the EU has pledged, and our President von der Leyen has pledged to mobilize more than 700 million euro per year in support of the Great Green Wall. This pledge is framed by the Great Green Wall Accelerator, so not only focusing strictly speaking on land restoration as such, but also working on more broadly on sustainable agricultural and food systems, working on agricultural value chains, working on agribusinesses, promoting land restoration and conservation, promoting governance systems, and also climate resilient infrastructure and sustainable energy. So we are extremely committed to deliver on this pledge. We actually delivered in 2021 and will continue to do so. So this will provide huge opportunities to scale up the key ingredients for success that have been highlighted in this session and make it then benefit to the broader undertaking that is the Great Green Wall. Yes, Patrick, you want to.
So to get back to what Lee was saying, what is enthusing you most about what has been achieved through a program like Regreening Africa is the embedding of science, the research and development, and is that what you're going to be trying to scale up and integrate into the other projects that you're moving forward? One could imagine, for example, that out of that 700 million, there's going to be some money spent on renewable energies, for example. Would you be using a similar science and development approach to understand that you ought to do perhaps agrivoltaics rather than coal-fired power stations? I mean, I'm just picking random examples here.
Well, definitely knowledge and innovation will remain a key part of the policy and programmatic mix that we will use. In particular on agriculture, if I may, we will continue funding the DESIRA initiative that has already allocated up to now 300 million euros to sustainable agriculture and agroecology. Agroecology, agroforestry will be more than ever at the heart of this research and innovation program. We will try to work on the link between innovation and action. Notably, we are about to launch a regional program in support of the Great Green Wall with the World Agroforestry Center. The main objective is to inform the Great Green Wall initiative with robust knowledge and robust science, and also to support the countries involved, not only the 11 countries that are part of the Pan-African Agency, but also 7 additional countries, so across this belt, to strengthen the land and vegetation monitoring systems using Earth observation technology. So that's the kind of things we will continue doing. We believe it's essential indeed to make the Great Green Wall vision happen.
Thank you, Bernard. Ladies and gentlemen, we are running a little bit over time, but I don't want to close this without giving you all an opportunity to give a final word. And I would start with you, Lee, and remind you of that question: how can you get how can you get scientific evidence into the heads of policymakers? You have 10 seconds.
Let's make sure our research is demand-driven and that we're really focusing on how we communicate these results.
Marwa, what is your advice? 10 seconds.
make policy reforms that ensure equity and social justice in land restoration efforts and benefit sharing.
Anna, qu'est-ce que le monde peut apprendre du Sénégal? 10 secondes.
Le potentiel est là, il faut juste le valoriser et on va y arriver.
Merveilleux. Chief Sintaro, your advice to African leaders, scientists, and implementers. 10 seconds.
For us, the Regreening Africa project was timely as the communities continues to go through some of the challenges in climate adaptation, indiscriminate bush burning, illegal logging, and wildlife hunting. So the more we are able to do this together as partners with the chiefs, the better.
Marvelous. Partnership with the chiefs. George, is there more to wealth than money?
Yeah, just let people know that value chains are really key, because if you want to increase the production and productivity, the people will get more money and to reinvest and to be more motivated to restore the landscape and the ecosystem in the broadland of Africa. That's really key.
Bernard, from the perspective of a donor and of a technical person?
Well, first restating that taking care of our land is key to navigate through the challenges we are facing today. Regreening Africa offers a number of key ingredients to achieve this and to achieve the broader vision of the Great Green Wall and ASR 100. I'm very hopeful after this session, having listened to all the energy and knowledge in the room, that we will make this happen by joining forces.
Marvelous. And last but not least, Mika, I will ask you to turn on your camera and to close us down.
Okay, I was going to hand over to Laura to close, but I'm very happy to. I just want to reiterate our key messages, really, that landscape restoration is critical for climate. It is possible. You've heard about all of the lessons, and we're really excited to work with all of you to take it forward. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our speakers and panelists. We really appreciate. Enjoy the rest of GLF and COP.